Well, good afternoon to everyone here. I'm so glad that you're here and enjoying this first day of daylight savings time. Good for you for setting your clocks forward and springing ahead. I had to be reminded myself. So our series, Sanders County Democrats, What Unites Us, is a virtual cinema series that is 6 monthly shows or installments. And the objective was to try to find topics that unite us here in Sanders County. Mineral County and Lincoln County are also invited to join in and to present information that will find ways to figure out how we can be united in certain topics. We talk about public lands, we talk about our Constitution, and this month I'm very happy to report that we're talking about public education. The future is in our children. We all know that. And we are so pleased and happy to have Senator Shannon O'Brien joining us today to talk about public education in rural counties in Montana. And here to make the introduction to Senator O'Brien is Daisy Carl-Smith, who is the current Secretary of Sanders County Democrats.
Hello, everybody. Shannon O'Brien currently serves as a state senator representing Missoula County, including the Sealy-Swan region. She served as Dean of Missoula College at the University of Montana and as an education policy advisor to Governor Steve Bullock. Shannon started her career as a high school history teacher and coach, worked in college access with families and students from low income or minority groups, and continues to advocate for supporting teachers and families to do its best for each student. And I'm so excited she can be here to join us today. So welcome, Shannon.
There, I figure I'll unmute myself before I start talking for a change. Thank you, Daisy and Mindy and Deb and John and everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity to share a Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening with you all and discuss certainly a topic that I find unites all of us, our young people and our workforce. And thanks for coordinating these What Unites Us gatherings. I think that in my humble experience, we have so much more that unites us than separates us. And I think that if we can focus on the similarities and not the differences, it's, sky's the limit. There's no telling what we can accomplish and get done. And that's what I believe you hired us to do with the vote is to get things done to be helpful. So we're going to focus on that. And then tonight, I'm so completely biased. I want to share that to start with. My mom was a school principal on Orcas Island, north of Seattle, kind of the Bellingham area. My aunt and my sister-in-law were teachers and educators. My dad was trained to be a teacher and then opened up his own little business. But I just fundamentally believe that if we can get it right in those earliest years, then our problems in the rest of society all those problems are taken care of. Education is in many ways the panacea. That if we have our young people well supported and well educated, then climate change issues will go away. Healthcare problems will be minimized. Poverty will be minimized. I won't say purely cured, but if we can get to a place where we're all able to prioritize this issue, then I think we'll get to a much better place. And I think we're getting there. We're seeing it the concept of education and public education certainly magnified. The Brookings Institute came out with a study in about 2009 that showed that about 4%, less than 4% of the media coverage was on education, which at the time, I was actually working on my doctorate at the University of Montana. And with the bias that I've already shared with you, I found it very interesting that we have, about a third or more of our state taxpayer dollars go toward public education. Yet the attention that we pay on education is minimal. That number, we've seen a significant increase if you're paying much attention to that area, especially in the last 6 months to a year. And so, or really since our I was just about to say our friend COVID started, but since COVID started, we started to see a lot more focus on education and where we are. I would like to start our conversation with a short video clip that helps illustrate only one of the kind of symptoms that we're struggling with in public education right now. We have seen over the last 10 years or so a decline nationwide in our test scores, our standardized test scores, which are only one indicator of student success, certainly, but also there's a wider differentiation between students who live in poverty and students who don't live in poverty and their outcomes in education. But another issue that's starting to become increasingly of concern, and I need to look up the word crisis because I don't want to overuse it, but it's certainly becoming a huge struggle, especially in rural Montana. And that is our teacher shortage. Teachers are, we are not having enough new teachers enter the profession as teachers are exiting the profession. And this is happening all across the United States, and it's certainly happening in Montana. So let's take a little moment to watch this this clip. Thanks, Mindy.
So it takes me just a second to bring up this clip, and I think that I can share it right here. In order to put on the sound, I have to almost start the clip, and then I have to go to the Zoom link in order to hear the sound. So I hope I can do this quickly.
That 55% of educators across the country said they were now planning on leaving the profession earlier than they had intended. That's a massive uptick from the 37% who had said that in August. So just halfway through this school year, the number has just skyrocketed. What we're hearing from teachers, both anecdotally and through this kind of polling data, is that almost 3/4 of them had said they've had to take on other teachers who have since left their jobs or their responsibilities, kind of adding additional students, additional classes, additional coaching. And there's just been a lot of anger, frustration, and unhappiness and fear regarding the inconsistency of COVID measures at public schools across the country. A lot of teachers pointed specifically to there not being proper ventilation or insufficient new ventilation measures, no HVAC, et cetera. And I think the general inconsistency of going in person and then going to remote, back and forth, it's as stressful for teachers as it is for families. And those are many of the reasons we're seeing this kind of uptick in educators wanting to leave the field.
Well, speaking of that uptick, I mean, what are the implications of this poll for those districts that are already struggling to keep teachers in the classrooms? And what are teachers saying about the specific things that they need in terms of help right now?
So this is an area I've looked at dating back to even before the pandemic. The teacher shortage in this country has just been an enormous problem in the just broader field of education and education public policy. According to government data analyzed by the National Education Association, the group, the big union that put out this poll, there were, as of this current week, 567,000 fewer teachers now than there were before the pandemic. That's just a massive uptick in teachers leaving the field, and they're just not finding new teachers. So this kind of shortage that existed before this pandemic crisis, it's getting worse. It's getting a lot worse. And what are teachers saying? You know, this poll addressed that, but we also hear from teachers directly on this issue. More than 90% of respondents to this NEA poll said the best way for them to see improvement in their careers and to stick around would be better pay. More than 90% said that a better, another way to improve things would be to hire more teachers. So, current teachers aren't doing 1, 2, 3 times the work. And then a really interesting thing we've heard both anecdotally and in this poll is a majority of teachers say what they'd like to see is help with serving the mental health needs of their students, adding more staff that can address that problem specifically. We've seen a real explosion in mental health problems among children over this pandemic. And a lot of that falls on our nation's public school teachers and educators who just in current times don't have the time or frankly the training to handle these kinds of challenges appropriately. So that's what they're asking for. And we're seeing some action on the state level to address those concerns.
All right, NBC's Adam Edelman for us there. Adam, thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of laying out and giving some examples of the problem that's taking place. And then I wanted to give you a little bit of hope. I think that there's some areas where we're moving in the right direction. And then I'd like to introduce you to my 13-year-old boy who's trying to distract me from you. My apologies. I don't know. Sorry about that. So share a little bit about what some states are doing, what some communities in Montana are doing to address some of the problems. And I really just used the relatively acute issue of this teacher shortage because it's new and it's becoming more and more urgent. So I'll continue to talk a little bit about the problems, but then don't give up on me. We're going to have a little bit of hope. Last fall in the state of Montana, there were over 500 vacancies, teacher vacancies. And that doesn't include, those are for teachers. That doesn't include, and that's a right somewhere between 11 and 1,200 teachers total in the state. And that doesn't include bus drivers. That doesn't include principals or superintendents or, lunch folks in the kitchens. The concerns are, the shortages are pretty serious. So when I say teacher vacancies, what that means is they could not find, and this is mostly in our rural schools, a qualified teacher to fill that position. Or if they did find a qualified person to fill the position, the pay was not substantial enough to pay for a mortgage or rent. For example, and I know in some areas, we can talk about this, but Seeley Lake, I try to visit the schools in my district here. And Seeley Lake, I was up there just a couple weeks ago, and they had 5 homes on the market in the August, September time period, and none of those homes were under $700,000. And so, and their starting salary is right at about $33,000 a year for a first-year teacher. So we can do the math, and then if you think about childcare, which as a matter of fact, and I'm working on a potential solution with the community foundation there. Childcare actually doesn't exist. There is no childcare facility of any type there. There are family and friends, but if you're coming from out of town, and I'm guessing that there's a similar picture that's painted in Trout Creek, in Knoxon, in St. Regis, in the western corners of the state. So what we're seeing with those, I mean, the kids are still coming, the kids are still showing up. So with those 500 kids, we either see substitute teachers come in, or principals or superintendents covering. We might see provisional teaching licenses. So if you do not have any training in education, you've never been a teacher before, but you have, let's say, a bachelor's degree in science, or maybe you're an RN, then you can teach with what's called a provisional certificate, which allows you to teach for 3 years, and you have to show evidence that you are working toward your teaching certificate. So you have a intention to earn your certificate. And the state actually right now is going through some revisions, some proposed revisions on what it means to be a trained teacher and what it means to have a teaching certificate. And that's kind of something else that we can talk about. So that's part of the issue that's going on right now. And the good news is, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting to see increased attention on education policy in general. And the challenges that are taking place we believe they're fixable. And I tend to focus right now on teachers, on early learning, and then family engagement. And that those are a couple of the topics I'd like to speak on here. But I'd like to just take a moment, as I painted the picture, if there's anyone here who would like to contribute or share your perception of what's going on in your community, both for my own knowledge, and you can help me be a better legislator, but also if you have information that is germane to the conversation.
Well, I'll speak up here because I queried a couple of school districts and where their base pay was. And for those of you who collective bargaining agreements are generally available on every school's webpage. Knoxon Schools starts at $28,263,000. So that's quite low, to say the least. In addition, the superintendent is the highest paid in the Class C superintendent. So that's a disparity that rubs the system a little bit raw. And every school, as if you don't know, every school does their own negotiations by district in this state. So there can, just 30 miles down the road, there can be a difference in pay scale, whereas, for example, Washington is a statewide pay scale. Thompson Falls, I can speak to that. The listed collective bargaining agreement starting pay is $31,043 or something like that, 31,000 and change. However, there must be some sort of a bonus, because when talking to those staff members, the starting pay is 34,000 because they get some sort of a bonus, an incentive of being there. And Plains, I tried to find the Plains base pay, but housing is a problem in this area as well as every place else. And we have so many people moving into Sanders County that it is also quite difficult and quite expensive to purchase, and rent is pretty much difficult to find. But a lot of the school districts do have teacherages. Not all of them, but some of them do. So I just wanted to add that 2 cents for information for this particular presentation, and how hard it is to recruit teachers into those pay scales. They have school loans they have to pay back. They have the same increase in inflation and cost of living. And quality teaching is getting harder and harder to come by unless you have some sort of a standing in that local community. I know there's a couple other people, and I won't call on them necessarily, but maybe other people may want to chime in with information, local information, should they wish.
Hi, this is Daisy. I just did the math. Calculating teachers' contracts are usually 186 days. And let's say they work a minimum of 9 hours a day, they're making about $19 an hour. And they have to pay for their college degrees, right? The years lost getting those college degrees that they would have earned salaries. And then if you think about what fast food restaurants are making, it's pretty close, right? So there's also when you're in fast food, you can usually go home and not have to worry about children, lesson plans, grading, etc. So as an educator, I'm a licensed teacher and school administrator in Montana. I run a nonprofit. I would say that, and one of the reasons I left being a principal too, one of the reasons is salary. And then what you're expected to do for that salary. You deal with mental health crisis, law enforcement, curriculum. There's a lot. So anyway, Montana has, since, the last 20 years, been pretty low on teaching, paying its teachers. So of course, they go out of state to Colorado, other states that pay higher, even when they graduate through the university. So I keep hearing, oh, but we're changing our accreditation to get more provisional licenses. And I kind of think that's kind of sad because we have such great educators here, or people that would like to teach in Montana, but they just can't afford it. And then from a realtor's point of view, we used to do this thing. I was a realtor in New Jersey, and there was this thing like if someone comes into your office and says, how much of a mortgage can I get? Well, you usually say your mortgage can be 3 times your gross salary. So if you're making $50,000, you don't want a mortgage of over $150,000. So if you take a salary of $30,000, you can afford usually a mortgage of $90,000. And someone had mentioned the average price of a home in one area is $700,000. We've got a tough situation.
Thanks, Daisy. Anyone else want to add? Is that Charles?
Yeah, this is Charles. Hi, everybody. I'm looking at you on the big screen, so if I'm not, I'm not doing this, I'm looking at you up here. My wife and I, a long time ago, we're both retired teachers. We went to Washington, and the beginning salary now in Washington is, and I think it's by state law, is $40,000. And in just a couple of years after I retired, that was in 2018. I was at the top of the scale, as you might expect for a senior teacher, and it went from $67,000 to I would have made $105,000. Washington just realized that they had to pay teachers, and of course, continuing education for teachers was also on their dollar too. Very, very seldom could you get any credits that were, sponsored by essentially the state. It happened, but not very much. Working conditions. my dissertation was in schools that have, actually, I did the dissertation in the bottom 5% of schools as ranked on these state tests. And I looked at working relationships within the school. And those schools had essentially incredible leadership and sharing. They had to, or they couldn't, I mean, they had to. The poverty rate, the free and reduced lunch rate was in excess of 90% in all of the schools that I studied. I studied 7 schools in my dissertation, and leadership makes a heck of a difference. It doesn't help your house payment. It doesn't make your student loan payments. But if it's a great place to work, and yes, we do need more teachers. Of course, we need more teachers and more counselors and more basic staff. There's a lot that we can still do in the community by asking the community to participate. And it does take time. My average for teachers working, and then those of you who are teachers, we all work at least 60 hours a week. It's a 60-hour-a-week job. It's not 40. And well, anyway, that's my say. But we can get busy and do really be active in the community. And I think also if we had more local education from the university. To give you an example, I'm working on a project now, and I'm playing with an idea of an AA degree in rural communities, not a bachelor's, but an AA degree in rural communities. What do rural communities need to know in order to stay competitive in business, to mediate and adjust to climate change? How can they attract people to work to their communities that they absolutely depend on high-speed internet, but they still send their children to the schools, they pay the local taxes, they shop in the local stores? There is also just a lack of understanding. We are not we're not on the outskirts of Missoula. Well, that's a lot to say. Senator, I'll send you a letter and I'll share that idea with you. And that is a new idea. I literally came up with it 2 days ago. I've got an extended project here going, but go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm very curious, and I will plug my or Mindy, you're more than welcome. I'll share with all of you my email address and my cell phone. I'm easy to get a hold of, and I find that I hand out my cell phone number and people seem to respect that. They don't, so I'm curious. You've definitely piqued my interest, and kind of to piggyback on something that Daisy and Charles, what you said too, is the teaching salaries are. I just want to point out that 186 day contract per year sounds really nice, and 2 weeks off at Christmas and spring break and all the 3-day weekends and then summers off all sound great. But I think any teacher that you work with or that you speak with today, and I think it was different when I started teaching in 1994, classroom teachers are or non-classroom teachers are, in the schools in early August, prepping and getting focused on their students, doing home visits or phone calls to home, whatever it might be. Most of June is, once school's out, it's wrapping up. So, I would venture to say that I think for most teachers now, it's we could say a good solid 4 weeks off in the summer. I think that would be fair, but oftentimes even then there's a 3 to 5 day training that's going on in Bozeman out of their own pocket, Charles, as you said, that they just can't miss, that they really feel like they need to go to. So so it does sound like I think for a lot of people, it sounds great. But it's the reality is, and then a lot of teachers are working during that month, you know, pouring coffee or doing whatever needs to be done, or going fishing up in Alaska, or however they can to supplement their costs. So the Learning Policy Institute which is based out of Stanford University. Woman named Linda Darling Hammond is the director of that. And I've been following her for probably 10 years, actually 10 or 15 years now. And they have a handful of, they've written a number of reports that are really helpful, I think. And they talk about broad access to training. So some of you have heard the term grow your own teachers, is finding the teacher's assistant or the person who's working in the lunchroom or at the crosswalk who knows how to connect with students. And that engagement piece is really important. Children, research shows that if they hear their name at least once a day, that they're significantly more likely to be successful. They're significantly less likely to drop out later on in high school. So finding people who are invested in the community and aren't going to show up to get their first teaching job and stay there for 2 years and then come back to Missoula where they really want to be, or to Bozeman or to Kalispell. That's kind of one of the areas, but getting access that is creative, distance learning, whatever it might be. And University of Montana Western out of Dillon has had a program for many years now that is a distance learning program for future teachers. And then we've talked about competitive salaries. And then, and Charles, you touched on this too, but support for the teachers once they're in the classroom or once they're teaching is really important, and shows that research shows that that's a piece as well, because you know, for those of you who have been classroom teachers, I was a high school social studies teacher. I had 150 students going through my classroom every day, plus coaching, plus trying to reach out to coordinate with the counselor for the students who were really struggling on either end, or working with the principal and the families. And it's a heavy load to carry. There's also been some significant discussion on school redesign and finding ways to engage, as we've talked about earlier, mental health options for students, and kind of looking at the whole child and the whole family. So there are a number of pieces that are being used, and ways to engage the community and bring the community in. One piece I think that in the state of Montana has been, I'm not sure if overlooked is the right word, but we are one of 6 states that does not provide any type of early learning, early care and education at the 0 to 5 ages from the state level. And we're one of 6 in the country that doesn't offer a public form of pre-K, of support for 3 and 4 year olds. Many districts right now are finding the funding to do it on their own. And but research overwhelmingly shows that when you're Miss O'Brien in the high school with those 150 kids, and a good handful of them are reading at the 3rd grade level, they're sophomores, and they're reading at the 3rd, maybe 4th grade level. Some of them are ready for 300 and 400 level college history, and you're trying to keep everyone either on the same page literally, or trying to find ways to help support all the learners. and when I first became a teacher, I thought, if we could do something better at the middle school level to help them be ready for high school, that would be great. And then I did a little digging there, and that wasn't the problem. It was elementary school. Some of you know, by grade 2 or grade 3, the learning, there's a switch that goes from learning to read to reading to learn. So if you don't have that dialed in, if you can't read yet fluently by 3rd grade, then you are behind in all of your subjects, because the curriculum typically shifts at that time. And there is a refocus right now on kind of mastery learning, where you graduate on when it's time for you to graduate on individually. And if we can have better ratios and more support, then that would be helpful. But we want to make sure that students are arriving kindergarten ready. They're ready to learn. And so, Mindy, I'm going to ask you to put our next video up that looks a little bit into the brain science behind what happens in our earliest years to prevent some of the challenges that teachers are facing.
Excellent. So here we go. And I've shared this screen, and it just takes me a moment to share this, make sure I share the sound of it.
And I'll just share while you're doing that. This fellow, Jack Shonkoff, is probably one of the best known early brain development experts in, I would say, in the world. I've been following him for probably eight or more years now. And the Center on the Developing Child out of Harvard is there's a lot of good ones out there, but this is a great one to go to if you want to dig deeper.
So here we go. And somebody, Deb, I'm looking at you. If you would please give me the thumbs up if you can hear the sound on this.
No sound.
So Deb is saying no, she can't see the sound. So I don't know how more share the sound. Here I go again. Deb, I'm looking at you.
All of the challenging social problems that our society and other societies face. What we're learning from exciting developments in neuroscience and molecular biology is how much early experience from birth, in fact, even before birth, how much this experience literally gets into our bodies and shapes our learning capacities, our behaviors, and our physical and mental health. The brain is basically built from the bottom up. First, the brain builds basic circuits, and then more complex circuits are built on top of those basic circuits as we develop more complex skills. Biologically, the brain is prepared to be shaped by experience. It's expecting the experiences that a young child has to literally influence the formation of its circuitry. The brain is a highly integrated organ which has multiple sections that specialize in different processes. Parts of the brain are involved more in cognitive function, and other parts that are involved in processing of emotion, and parts involved in seeing and hearing. So if a child is emotionally well put together, that will affect more positive and productive learning. And if a child is preoccupied with fears or anxiety, no matter how intellectually gifted that child might be, his or her learning is going to be impaired by that kind of emotional interference. So when we talk about healthy development in the early years, and particularly when we talk about preparing children to succeed in school, we cannot separate cognitive development from social and emotional development. You can't have one without the other. So when children experience stable, nurturing relationships, It fosters the development of healthy circuitry, and when children experience uncertainty or instability, it literally disrupts the circuitry and the brain's architecture as it's being built. Over time, this has a wear and tear effect, and the more stress you have, the more likely you are to have a whole range of problems later on. And this is why excessive, prolonged stress early in life is associated with a higher prevalence later, not only of learning problems and behavior difficulties, but also physical and mental health problems. The brain is optimally flexible and plastic early in life, but as it develops its circuitry and refines its circuitry, it loses some of its flexibility, which is why intervening early is so important, because as we often say, when it comes to brain circuitry, it's better to get it right the first time than to try to fix it later.
Okay, let's unpack this, and I'm going to add a couple more things to it. There was an economist who, about 25 years ago, James Heckman, out of Chicago, University of Chicago, who was charged with looking at the efficacy of programs for retraining through the U.S. Department of Labor. And one of the things he found was that while they are these retraining programs are helpful in some ways, they didn't create the longevity that they wanted to see and in these new jobs for people. So he did a little digging further and found that it was what some people call the soft skills, or the non-hard skills. It wasn't how to put drill bits together, or it wasn't the actual skills of the actual job. It was the soft skills: showing up on time, getting along with people, managing anger, following direction, waiting your turn, some of those things. And so digging a little bit deeper, found that in those first 5 to 7 years, if you can get those skills dialed in, then you're significantly more likely to be successful in life. There was a study that showed that a longevity study, again out of Chicago, a preschool program that focused on what they called at-risk, mostly poverty, children living in poverty, and they found that the children who did not receive high quality early learning opportunities were 75% more likely to be arrested of a violent crime. In addition to significantly more likely to be have a teenage pregnancy, very much more likely to be incarcerated in general. But there are all of these indicators that if children have a high quality early learning experience, they're kindergarten ready. So they understand, they might not know how to read, and that's okay, but they can pick out the letters of their own name, for example, or they know that a book goes like this and like that. And those are the cognitive pieces. But as Sean Koff in the video mentioned, it's also those social pieces. So they can sit down, crisscross applesauce, and listen and wait their turn and do some of those skills and master some of those skills that are required once they get into kindergarten. And if we can ensure that children are ready in kindergarten to learn how to read each other, and that's a piece that is critical. What he did not mention, what Sean Koff did not mention in the video, some of you may know this, in the first 3 to 4 years of life, there are 6 to, they recently said it might be as many as 12 neurons, brain cells, are being created per second for the young people. And then that starts to slow down after 4 or 5. And then they use the brain creates this pruning, this branching and pruning method where if the neurons are being created and they go kind of out like this. And this is why we all know that if we had just moved to Spain and learned the Spanish language when we were 4 or 5 or 6 years old, that we'd master it. If those neurons aren't used, then they're just naturally pruned back. And so those of us who are, I'll say over 50 for myself, we have these channels that are well developed, and it is hard to teach an old dog new tricks. We can still do it though. We can still learn new tricks, but we just don't create the neurons as fast. So there are those pieces. And then lastly, I will say, and we have introduced a pre-K bill, or I should say a preschool bill has been introduced in Montana to the legislature every legislative session since 2015. And we have not been successful in moving that forward. Last session, one of my great victories is that I introduced a pre-K bill that I knew would not be successful. And I shared that with my Republican friends. But I felt very strongly that the 67th legislative session did not go down in history without the conversation about it. And so I was able to have that win. It made it to the floor, which is the furthest it's ever made it. So that I took that as a victory, and I figure we'll get there. We are seeing significantly more discussion around it at the policy level, at the legislative level, because childcare is now directly affecting our workforce. People are not going back to work because they can't afford, they can't afford the childcare. It's right around $1,000 a month per child for childcare. And, we can get back to our Daisy, our math whiz, and recognize that it's just unaffordable. I see the Lymans are on board. I just wanted to say hi, and I know Jessica and Peter. Anyway, so if there's anyone who wants to add anything to the childcare or the early learning piece, anything that you noticed in that video, I'd be curious to hear what you might have to say. We have about 12 minutes left total, and I still have a couple more things I just wanted to discuss, but I'm curious. Is that
My
Bev?
question go ahead.
You're muted, Bev.
Deb. I just want, Colleen and I want to say that video was excellent. It was very eye-opening about the brain. And I'm glad that you put that up there. I'm going to encourage a lot of people to take a look at that.
And if I'm going to invite you, the Center on the Developing Child out of Harvard has this amazing gift of taking the super wonky brain science and policy opportunities, and they put them in these great little packages of the video. There's all sorts of videos and PowerPoints that are smart, that aren't too smart. Do you know what I mean? They just simplify it, and they just help those of us who don't have a background in neuroscience understand why this is so important. And if I just feel like if we can dial this in these first 5 years, then the sky's the limit. Put a person on the moon, forget about that. we'll have great colonies on Mars and all those other constellation, all of those other opportunities that we have, and there'll be world peace.
I think I unmuted. Did I?
There you go.
Okay,
you-
I wanted
are
to
you
comment
Bev?
that Trout Creek, our little school here, has started the three through the pre-kindergarten classes we have now. So, and they're full up with enrollees.
Yeah.
So, as
That's-
much as, yeah. So anyway, we started.
That's
We
great.
have us mostly 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, and our superintendent opened it up because we have a 3-year-old in there, and it was only because there was a space, because we just have a limited number of spaces available. So, but he's really not encouraging the third because there's such a difference between, they all have to be together, and such a difference between a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. So anyway, we're trying.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the challenges, and my bias is that, it's a good challenge, is we need teachers who are trained in that early learning.
You bet.
So it's really important to, understand the play, the learning that goes on with play, that we're not sitting kids down, these little people down at their chairs and tables and giving them pencils and that kind of thing, that there's all sorts of learning that takes place.
Especially what you said was learning how to wait your turn, get in line, that type of thing. That
Yeah.
really prepares them. Give them a little patience. They'll have their turn.
Yeah.
So hopefully it'll work out well.
The School Administrators of Montana and School Board Association of Montana is working with schools, and Montana Rural Education Association as well are working with schools. While there is technically no funding for 3 and 4-year-olds, there is an opportunity for schools there's this exceptional circumstances clause, where if the school board approves it, a superintendent can say these 8 children have exceptional circumstances, and that term is not defined in law. So those exceptional, we have funding, federal funding, inadequate federal funding, in my opinion, but for students who qualify for special education. But this funding, is the same funding that we get from K through 12 students. We call it A and B, and annual number belonging. But the exceptional circumstance can be behind in literacy or low income, or it's defined by each school district. So that's where we're seeing kind of this mushroom taking place right now. I think there's a heightened awareness of the benefits, and there's we're just going to do it from a lot of superintendents and school boards, and that's hopeful. I continue. You see right through my bias. My apologies, but I do think if we can get this dialed in, we're in better shape. Other comments or questions?
I want to leave on a hopeful note.
Yeah.
One is maybe where Montana is headed, and how we as Sanders County, Mineral County, Lincoln County citizens can affect the legislative session for education for 2023.
Okay, thank you. So action item, call to action. One is our schools are not, and I was a student family coordinator at Ferndale High School. Traditionally, our schools are not designed to invite people in, especially as we get older. So the simple call to action is show up, find a way to get in there, whether it's at the crosswalk, volunteering, or showing up with pumpkin muffins, whatever it might be, to appreciate our teachers right now. I think just on the local level, that is an important first step. But I also think that that being in communication with your legislators, because education is primarily funded at the state level. So be in communication with your legislator, find out who your senator is and your representative is at the state level, and send them emails, and call them on the telephone and introduce yourself and be nice. Be really nice. And I was trained to make I wonder statements when things didn't match with my perspective. I wonder why this person is approaching this way. There is a pretty strong philosophy with some of the legislators that moms need to be home with their kids. So I think if you have that lens, and that's not practical for all families right now, and that brain development doesn't happen. So be aware of that. But I do think, and maybe starting with a thank you note to get on a good side first might be helpful. And then the other piece, Mindy, I'm drawing a blank. You and I had just talked about it. Oh, let me look at my notes.
For at-risk funding. So trying to break apart the public education system and
Right.
provide funding for homeschooling. And not that I think homeschooling is a bad thing. I've been a public educator all my life, and I've seen terrific homeschooling. But if the rumors have it right now, and this is a rumor, so nobody take this to the bank, but the rumor is $3,000 per student per family to do alternative education, and that can include homeschooling. That will break our rural education system, because if you have 3 kids and that's $15,000 a year, if you don't enroll your kid in the public education system, that will break the backs of rural education, truly. And again, that's a rumor that may be introduced in legislation in 2023. And oh my goodness, that would be terrible. So anyway, so those types of things. And I'm telling you, Shannon, Sanders County has committed people, and we may be small, but we are mighty. And there are probably 80 people who have submitted letters to the legislation in 2021. And we're ready to go in 2023. And so we need to know, and we are at the ready as best we can. Our legislators, we're very aware of on this particular Zoom, are not very compassionate to public education. But we need to know, and through me and to the various people, please let us know how we can help.
And so thank you. And this is a critical time for public education in Montana. We have an administration right now, and a majority of I wouldn't say necessarily a majority, but a strong group of legislators who are very interested in private education and public funding for private education. And I think what we need to keep in mind, and kind of Mindy, you said this too, but for every dollar that is taken from public education and put toward private education, our students suffer, our teachers suffer, our community suffers. And if you're interested in homeschooling, or if you're interested in sending your children to private schools, and that is great for you. And my take is, and I would invite you to consider whether or not that should be a taxpayer dollar responsibility. sending your children to private schools. And there is a concerted effort right now, Mindy, as Mindy pointed out, to provide that for our families that want to privatize our public education system. And it's happening all over the country. And it will be an uphill battle. I will tell you, and this is not easy, but we can be in touch. Mindy, I'll go through you unless you tell me otherwise. When a bill comes up, we need you to be on the record at the committee hearing. And it happens really fast. And we might find out that the committee hearing is tomorrow at 9 a.m. And so be prepared. And when you are, raise your hand if you've ever given public testimony for a bill hearing. Okay, you can do it Zoom now. I imagine we will continue that next session. I know we're going a minute over, my apologies. But when you give it, be short, be honest, and you can be general. You can say how important public education is to you. Don't worry about getting down into the weeds on a bill. You either come in as a proponent, an opponent to a bill, or as an expert testimony, where you don't take sides, but you're a professor in education or something. So you would sign up ahead of time as a proponent or an opponent. I would encourage you to be brief, and I would encourage you to just speak what you know, and don't worry about, don't be intimidated. People get really intimidated, and don't be intimidated. We need you. I'm telling you, we need you. Some of these bills, they have it all well coordinated, and they might have 20 people showing up to support this homeschool bill, for example, and we might not have anyone. So, watch your emails, be on an alert. And I'd be more than happy to have another meeting shortly before the legislative session to kind of help folks who want to be able to track bills, or do a little training on how to register ahead of time to give public testimony. And we're supposed to end right at 5, right? Yeah. So I'm happy to stay on for another few minutes. And if you guys have any other questions, but I taught social studies, right? So it's great to see people interested and engaged. And my phone number and my email is in the chat right at the top there. Don't hesitate to reach out to me, shoot me an email, or shoot me a text, or give me a call. I think this is an exciting time for education. I really think this is it. That this is our moment it's highlighted right now. And we can go in a good direction if we stay together and move forward. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator O'Brien. So, and thank you for joining us. And thank everyone who's joined this virtual cinema series. Next month, we will be talking about health. And I can just see how this particular video and series and installment talks about mental health in our county, both with children and with parents and families and adults. We've talked about the Medicaid expansion already. And so please, SandersCountyDemocrats.org. Jump on board. We have all of these series recorded and the videos available. And we try to keep you abreast. And finally, tomorrow, that's Monday, March 14th, is the final filing date for all of the state and county offices. And that includes school board members. And if anybody sets budget and policy decisions, it's school board members. So I can't encourage each and every one of you and anyone you may know to jump into the fray and file by 5 o'clock tomorrow, March 14th. So thank you again, Senator O'Brien, for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a good group. We'll be in touch.
Oh, good. Good night, everyone.
Good night.